Up until this point, for both our queries and mutations, for the argument values that needed to be passed to these operations, we've used a hard-coded value. For example, in the case of this mutation, for the remove mutation, we use the static value Fred. But of course, in a dynamic application, the value passed to a given query or mutation is almost never going to be the same. So while static values are an appropriate approach for development, we want to provide the ability to pass dynamic data to our GraphQL operations. For any programming language that we use, whether it's JavaScript, Python, etc., we can provide the data that we want on variables. And GraphQL also has the concept of variables. Let's execute our createBaby mutation once again, but this time using variables. So we'll rewrite our mutation, just like we did before. But the main difference is that after the mutation keyword, within a set of parentheses, we need to declare the variables that are then going to be passed to the arguments of our mutation. So if we take a look at the createBaby mutation once again, we see that it has one argument, babyInfo, and that's of type babyInfo, which is an object consisting of name and votes. So let's declare these two values as separate variables, name, and note that variables in GraphQL are declared with a $sign prepended to them. So we'll say $name, and then we need to specify the data type that this variable is going to contain, and it's going to be of type string and required, so we'll add our exclamation point, then we'll add a comma, then provide the next variable, so we'll say $votes, and that's going to contain an int, which will be required. Then to pass these variables to our arguments, we'll first provide the name babyInfo, then to name, the name field will pass the name variable, to votes we'll pass the votes variable, and once again we'll add as the returned fields name and votes. So this is how we declare and pass through variables to a mutation, but we haven't put any value on these variables. So every GraphQL IDE comes with a query variables panel where you can supply values to the variables that we declare. We can do that by opening up a set of curly braces, then between double quotes specifying the variable, and then after a colon pass through the value that we want it to accept. So for name, I'll set it to James, and for votes, I'll set it to 0. And note that it's always good to check to make sure that we're specifying the correct type for these variables, because we'll get an error if we don't declare the correct type and whether it's required or not. So it looks like we declared our types correctly for name and votes. So now that we have values passed to these variables, we'll hit the play button, and we get back our created baby with the name James and votes set to 0. So this concept of variables within GraphQL will be particularly important when we work with GraphQL on our client, when we execute a query or a given mutation. And since we're going to have different users in our app with different information that they want to add and update and delete, using and being familiar with GraphQL variables will be essential.